Hi everyone, it's Ren here. It's me again. Welcome to my room. Making two videos, well, not quite in a row, but you know, 2 days in a row, let's say, because they're essentially about the same topic. This video now is meant as a follow-up to the video I made yesterday about conflict, and specifically INFJs in conflict. It's occurred to me since then that, and partly as a result of getting some feedback and looking at the observations that people contributed, it occurred to me that I could go maybe into a tiny bit more detail about different types of conflicts and how to deal with them. Again, mostly from an INFJ perspective, although it's quite possible that these tips, these pieces of advice may turn out to be useful for other types also. Probably mostly feelers, admittedly, but who knows? I think that a friend said something that's quite true and important. He said that, especially in our day and age, maybe that wasn't the case, even 30 years ago, but especially in our day and age, we have to distinguish between conflict online and conflict in real life, because we have online conversations. Some of us have probably online conversations just as much as we have in the real world conversations. And as soon as there is a conversation, as soon as there is an exchange, arises together with it the possibility of conflict. And it's true that depending on whether the conflictual situation is online or offline, the parameters of the situation are slightly different. Now, they're not completely different, but they vary slightly. Each comes with its set of particular challenges, but also advantages. So, for example, if you look at an offline conflict, I think the way in which it is advantageous is that you can see the person, you can see what they're like, you can look at their body language, you can look at their expressions, you have a feel for their tone of voice. And so in a way, you have a lot more control over how you interpret the information, because it's undeniable, I think, that a lot of conflict online would not arise in reality simply because we're able to use our senses other than the sense of sight to approach another person. And so something that's said, online, a particular sentence, which annoys us, irritates us, or make us feel in some way intense, might not at all make us feel that way in the real world. So that's an advantage, because it means you'll have more control over the possibility of conflict erupting, including control over noticing that the other person is not intending at all to enter into some kind of conflictual relationship in the real world. Some people are just blunt. It's a fact of life, and being blunt, regardless of what we might think of it, does not make you a bad person. Some of the best people are blunt, and some of the worst people, including manipulators, are particularly adept at diplomatic language. So bluntness, much more likely to, in a certain sense, create confusion online. Now, of course, bluntness can also upset offline. We're sensitive to, excessive, I wouldn't say excessive honesty. And this is where bluntness is, in my mind, a failing. Honesty is obviously one of the greatest virtues. Bluntness is a failing simply because if there's a way of being honest without being blunt, then why be blunt? Bluntness is only honesty together with the possibility of upsetting the other person. Whereas honesty, although it may upset the other person, justifies itself. Bluntness doesn't. So we can be upset, obviously, by someone who's very blunt in the real world, but we have a lot of options for negotiating that upsetness practically, options that are not available as easily to us online. I think the best option to deal with it in the real world, uses the resources of the real world, is to literally express that the other person has been blunt and express that you'd appreciate, if they could have a slightly softer tone. And usually, I think what you should try to do is not to express that in a way that is personal. You should not say, you're blunt, you're bad, you're blah, 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 however you say it. You should try to make it more about the effect that the bluntness is having on you. If the person is respectful, they'll adapt. So you can say, well, I find, that it is hard to talk if you're being so blunt. Can you soften your messages a little bit? It would be easier, So that requires a certain kind of honesty about yourself and a willingness to be sincere about your states of feeling. But it's a strength. And it's a strength that FE users are very capable of. They're predisposed towards it if they allow themselves to. And in a way, INFJs can be very influential people, among the most influential types in potential, because they're able to express those states of feeling. Expressing states of feeling can sway other people in a way that is not personally aggressive. So that's one way. It's much harder online because there's a lot of anonymity online. And so you don't necessarily want to express your state of feeling to someone you don't really know well, for instance, or someone that you've known well online for a while. But knowing someone well online, we all know that it's not quite the same as knowing someone well in real life. Unless maybe you've known them for years. But otherwise, it's knowing them well within the context of an online friendship, And I don't deny that it can be a friendship, but an online friendship is still different from an in the real world type friendship. So usually that resource which you have in the real world is not necessarily available in the same way online. In the same way, in the real world, if someone is sometimes someone can be very aggressive and you can notice, and that's an important thing to keep in mind, that sometimes the conflict is not worth it. You can just walk away. Sometimes online, if you're engaged in conversation, might be a bit hard. You're already taking part in a thread. Sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes it's harder to walk away in real life, so that depends. But do keep in mind at all times that when you're in the midst of conflict, all of what I said in the previous video holds as long as you have previously, in a preliminary manner, asked yourself, and this requires a lot of calmness, a lot of equanimity, and a lot of distance, an ability to not let yourself be dominated completely by your emotions. To ask yourself, what is my purpose here? What is my purpose? Have I got more to gain by joining in on the conflict, joining in and in my INFJ type way, trying to channel it through questioning, for example? Or is it pointless? So ask yourself that question, because sometimes it's entirely pointless and there's not even any point engaging. And in those instances, not engaging will not be at the detriment of your self-worth or at the value that you yourself hold towards your convictions. So always ask yourself, what have I got to gain? Is it worth it? Sometimes we engage in conflicts because of our egos. That's a very, very misled and misguided justification for conflict. Not to mention that often not agreeing to join in a conflict, if the other person is trying to make us do that, can actually reinforce our self-respect. So this is a level of precision that I didn't really get into in the previous video. It really depends on how you perceive the other's motives and your own motives in relation to the conflict. Sometimes a conflict is not worth it. And having the authority toward yourself and toward the other person not to engage is something that can be very strong. But I'm talking specifically, and I was talking specifically in the last video of the instances where we would like to, but we sweep it under the rug or we run away because we find it will be too painful. And in these instances, like I said, it's better, I think, to try to learn to cultivate an approach that is a bit more proactive and that accepts the inevitability of productive conflict sometimes with your own strengths. Now, on offline, like I said, you have a whole range of body language appreciation, a whole range of speech modes that's available to you that you should make use of as much as possible to make the other person understand that you are willing to appreciate their perspective and curious about their perspective without necessarily endorsing their perspective. So that's a very good approach. And INFJs can be excellent at this because they can place themselves in the shoes of the other person and have an intuitive sense of the kind of, not just the kind of content, but also the kind of wording that is going to resonate with the other person, all the while not agreeing with the other person. So play on your strength. Now, online, questioning, I think, is more important than ever because there are going to be cases where you're not sure. There's going to be cases where you're not sure whether it's worth entering into a conflictual exchange or not. And there are going to be those cases where you go in not being certain. Now, if you're assertive and it turns out that it's not worth it, that there was never going to be resolution at the end of it, you've exhausted yourself mentally, your energy, at the energy level, you're depleted and you're frustrated. So it wasn't worth it and you're kind of still irritated, you're still burned. Tomorrow you're going to be like, oh, if only I had said it like that. But really maybe the point was not so much to say things differently, but to, again, change your mode of communicating towards something that is more oriented towards perception, curiosity, questioning. Because one big advantage that I did not mention in my previous video is that imagine that there was not going to be any resolution. You still go in because you're not sure. It's a gray area. If you just go for the fisticuffs, nothing's going to happen except negative emotion. If you go for the questioning, there won't be a resolution, but you might still learn something. Someone who's uncouth, someone who is annoying, someone who doesn't even want resolution, might still be someone who has an interesting thing, as part of their knowledge arsenal that you don't have. And it might be somewhat satisfactory to you if, in place of arriving at an agreement, you have, through openness and questioning, come out of something that was not resolved, having still learned information. Learn information from someone that you might not like, you might find intense or, irritating, but someone that you can still benefit from in some way. And it's never better to stay calm and make them understand that even if you don't agree, you're still listening to their perspective. They will talk, inevitably. Alright guys, see you soon.